recently talked about the first air raid that we had, and we had to shelter. My mother had taken us to our air raid shelter, our Anderson shelter. But the thing about it was, what alerted my mother to take us there was the siren. Now, up until then, I don't think any of us knew what a siren was. But we eventually learned a lot more about that, both that warning that there was a raid and all clear when the skies were presumed to be clear. I'd been walking along Shettleston Road shortly after that air raid warning that had taken us to our shelter. And Shettleston Road has changed quite a bit now, for that was in 1940s, and it's now 2020s. Anyway, walking along, quite the thing, and all of a sudden the siren went off. Now, the siren was on top of the police office in what they called Chester Street, but the sound was such that you felt as if it was going to crush you. You finished up shaking, really shaking, with the horrendous wailing noise that came from that. Now, I was a little distance away from it, but anyway, it was frightening. It caused me to look around and see what other things were strange in Shettleston Road. We had what we call baffle walls. Now, these were several different presentations. These were always at the front of a close. And a close was the entry to a tenement building, and then there would be a staircase up to the various floors that existed within the tenement. Some were built with corrugated sheeting, and they had a dimension of about 8 feet by about, say, 10 foot high, and a depth from front to back of about 3 or 3.5 feet. That was a total encasement of corrugated sheeting filled with sand. Caused a few accidents because one or two persons who were a little unsteady in their feet collided with them. People would come along and forget they were there, and at the last lap step past them. This was talking about blackout times. There was no street lights, and you would catch your coat on maybe one of the corners of it, and it would draw you in, and you'd bang your head or knee or whatever it was. There was a few accidents. Quite a number of them seemed to finish up after drinking time in the pubs, which is about 9:30 in these days, and it seemed to turn out to be black eyes. Anyway, I can't comment on how that happened. It's a regular issue. When you looked into the close, after the outbreak, all of a sudden, every tenement building that I saw had its walls and roof supported by heavy timbers. The idea being was that it enclosed an area where the residents of the houses could come down, and lacking a shelter, they could in fact shelter in the close. The timber was really quite heavy stuff. It wasn't a wee bit of wood here and there. It really encased the place, and I kept on thinking, how does all that timber suddenly materialise? I never knew as a wee boy we had as much timber in one close as seemed to be in fact enough for the whole of Britain. Eventually, I suppose there was shelters built in the back gardens of the closes, or the drying greens that existed there. But never having made an investigation, I couldn't totally comment. The baffle wall, the idea was, in fact, if a bomb was dropped, struck the building, or landed nearby, it would create up a pressure wave. Now the idea was, if it dropped, say, in the street on the outside of the close, the blast would in fact have shot right through the close, probably because it created a vacuum. It would draw the walls of the close in and collapse, which would help to bring down the collapse of the building too. So a blast could create a vacuum effect with it, blew all the air away from the area, and then when it rushed in again, it was two ways of damage: a vacuum and then a blast. It really dropped me back to thinking one day when I was out with Curry, the secret names. I mean, we just don't want to let the enemy know too much about the people that were working against them. Anyway, Curry and I set out along Gilmerton Street to look for shrapnel from the raid that had occurred the night before. And Bobby Curry was a heck of a lot better at finding shrapnel than me. Now, shrapnel resembled a piece of steel that had been shattered and had extremely rough, serrated edges on them. Now, I never seemed to notice any in the middle of the pavement or middle of the road. They always seemed to have landed and probably bounced over until they were cornered by the edge of the pavement. We went along and we'd pick it up. Some were quite hefty, others were in fact quite small. The hefty bits would be probably about an inch and a half long by about an inch thick, and in fact probably an inch with a profile of roughly square. I couldn't imagine what it would have done if it had hit anyone. I often wondered, why was there no holes in the roof with these things falling? And why was there no dents in the road? But nonetheless, it weren't noticeable. I'm quite sure after the war was over, people would find that their gutters were filled with these particles, rusted to the core, I suppose, and that there was slates cracked and such like, but not penetrated. So that was one thing. The Germans also dropped a bomb called an incendiary bomb. They used a lot of it, particularly in London and built-up areas. These were a bomb that when they fell, they exploded and then caught fire, and they burned very, very fiercely. In these days, we were all supplied with bags of sand, and of course, eventually the bags burst and scattered all over the place. Probably every close would have a bag of sand, small bag, just about 18 inches tall, or something similar in metric measurements, and they were quite heavy to lift. Occasionally they'd be kicked or punctured by a pram going by because of the narrowness of the closes. But the idea was that you would, if you saw an incendiary bomb, you would go over and empty a bag of sand over it, and that apparently put it out. I've no experience of that being the case. There was also long shafted shovels that you could add extensions to. In fact, it was like a large, very large scoop that people would have used to scoop large quantities of tea or salt or sugar into a bag. These were used quite a lot to contain that. Anyway, back to the search for shrapnel. It proved to be a rather bare night regards the shrapnel in our street, so we decided to turn to other places, and we eventually moved along back to where we started and decided to go round to Amalree Street, which was a bus route. Could see nothing there, so we moved on further and then started going up a street to the left. We got up to the top of that. Now, the houses that we were now going round about weren't the steel houses that we lived in Gilmerton Street. It was in fact brick houses, corporation houses they called them for some reason or other. So we went up there, could find nothing, and eventually reached Gelston Street. The Gelston Street run down back into Amalree Street. All of a sudden we realised there was something abnormal about the place. There's no debris or anything lying about. The hedge looked a bit raggedy, and then when we stepped back a bit and looked, we realised that it was only half a house. There was nothing in the ground floor, it had disappeared. Upstairs there was no roof. The upstairs accommodation was wide to the world. I'm not even sure there was a floor there, but there was a pantry door swinging back and forward. And when it swung back, you could see where the people had stacked their milk on the shelves on the door. They had other things hanging at the back of the door. And you see a bit into the pantry where there would be other foodstuffs, bags of flour, this, that, and the next thing, maybe a pot of jam. We were aghast at the fact that had been bombed. The bottles of milk were intact. Why was that door still there? Now this was the freakishness of a bomb. That house with no bricks lying about, they seemed to have just disappeared. Now this is the morning after, and I'm positive no one ran around and picked up all the bricks and got rid of them. So, excuse me, we marvelled at that. Eventually walked further down to Amalree Street. We suddenly saw that in one of the gardens, when we looked over the hedge, was a big gigantic hole right in front of the house. And we're looking over and speculating what it would be. And of course we both came up with the idea it was a bomb. Just at that, 2 air raid wardens or policemen, I don't know which, we didn't stay around to identify them. One was about 50 yards away to the left of us, and one about 50 yards to the right of us. And they used some language that I don't think we were very familiar with, but I think the clear indication was, get yourself out of there as fast as you can. So, run away home, and probably told their mums about these men chasing us. It then came to light some time later that was an unexploded bomb lying in front of that house. It penetrated into the ground in front of the garden, and just over the hedge. It was probably about 4 feet to the edge of the crater, loads of water in the bottom of the crater, and there didn't seem to be any broken windows round about the place. Not that I can remember at this time, but that was that. So it gave us an idea that maybe it wasn't an easy place to go about if there was bombs about. But we, in fact, scampered home, told our parents, and from then onwards we were a bit more careful where we wandered to try and get shrapnel.